This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Today we're spending the hour looking at the Kids for Cash scandal, the shocking story of how thousands of children in Pennsylvania were jailed by two corrupt judges who received kickbacks from the builders and owners of private prisons, PA Child Care in Pittston Township and its sister company, Western PA Child Care in Butler County, Pennsylvania. Let's turn to an excerpt of the new documentary, Kids for Cash. This clip features one of the jailed children, Amanda Laura.
I was in 8th grade. I was 13. Me and this girl, we used to be friends. But she was sitting there calling me a slut and a whore and I can't stand you because we weren't friends anymore. So I threw a volleyball at her. Then when she walked past me, she did one of those hair kind of flips in my face. And then I had it was over. We ended up fighting. They took me to the office with the police officer, called my father, told him to come get his crazy daughter out of their school. She's starting trouble.
Your kid was locked up for slapping a girl that shouldn't have never went any farther than the local magistrate if the school wasn't satisfied with suspending her for 3 days. Not out to a juvenile judge. And then to find out it was all from greed.
This lady, she pulled my dad back and she grabbed my arm and she's like, come with me.
That's a clip from the new film Kids for Cash. The film's director and producer, Robert May, joins us now. His past films include The War Tapes, The Station Agent, and the Oscar-winning Fog of War. We're also joined by Robert Schwartz, executive director of the Juvenile Law Center in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He began by criticizing the legal community for failing to stop the Kids for Cash scandal.
There was a whole legal community passing through that courtroom who did nothing over a 5-year period. The public defender did nothing. In fact, later investigations showed that they just didn't want to take on more cases, and they certainly didn't want to take on Judge Civarella. The private bar was in the room. They did nothing. The prosecutors were there for every case. They saw kids being shackled and dragged out of courtrooms.
Now, a lot of people say, well, they're the prosecutor.
Well, but they have an ethical obligation to see that justice is done. That's in the Code of Professional Responsibility. And they failed that code as well. Probation officers saw that kids were being dragged out of the courtroom for really minor stuff. While the rest of the country was moving towards a treat kids in the community, de-incarcerate this juvenile justice system, in Judge Civarella's court, it was exactly the opposite. It was send kids away, and one after the other was sent away.
So you already felt that this judge was guilty for sending away so many kids. We're talking thousands of kids. We
knew that he had violated the rights of hundreds and hundreds of kids at the time we did our initial investigation. In the spring of 2008, we filed an application with the Pennsylvania Supreme Court asking them to reverse all of these adjudications of delinquency, these findings of guilt, and erase the kids' records. We asked them to exercise what we call the court's King's Bench jurisdiction. It would enable them to act even though the time for appeal had lapsed. After we filed that petition, the FBI called our chief counsel, Marshall Levick, and asked, what did we know? Unbeknownst to us, they had started an investigation of their own of Judge Conahan, the former president judge of Luzerne County, because of his connections with organized crime. So there were a couple of threads happening at the same time that intersected and finally came to the public light in January of 2009 when the U.S. Attorney for the Middle District of Pennsylvania issued the bills of information with some preliminary guilty pleas for Judge Civarella and Judge Conahan.
And explain what Civarella was charged with and this whole issue of Kids for Cash.
Judge Civarella was charged with theft of lawful services. You know, the theft makes it unlawful. Wire fraud, tax evasion, and the original bill of information that he and Conahan signed also spoke about a quid pro quo, that he was taking money to have kids locked up. But what we did know for sure was that he had taken money, or was charged with taking money and agreed in the original plea agreements from the contractor who built a new detention center in Luzerne County and from one of the owners of the for-profit facility that was subsequently built.
Which brings us to Robert May, the director and producer of this new documentary, Kids for Cash. His past films include The War Tapes and the Oscar-winning Fog of War. You did something very unusual. You not only began over the next years to capture the stories of the families, of the parents and the kids who were sent away, but you also managed to talk to both judges who were convicted. But you did it well before they were convicted. Explain.
Well, we initially said, look, we're not going to do this movie unless we can get access to both the villain and the victim, because it would just become another story with a sort of one-dimensional story, and the kid's story seemed so obvious, and that there had to be more to the story, and we wanted to understand more what that would be.
So how did you get these judges to talk?
Well, it took some time because I didn't know them at all and never met them before. And once I figured out how to meet with Judge Ciavarella, the pitch was actually quite simple. I said to him, I think there's sort of a one-dimensional story that is being portrayed primarily by the media, that you are the Kids for Cash judge. You took money to send kids away. You traded kids for cash. That's it. That's what I see. That's what I read. That's all I see. I assume there's another side to this story.
Let me go to a clip from your film, from Kids for Cash, of former Judge Mark Ciavarella.
I have not told my attorney that I agreed to do this documentary. And maybe me doing what I'm doing is going to come back to hurt me. But I felt this was an opportunity for me to let people know what really happened. I'm not this mad judge who was just throwing kids away and shipping them out and locking them up and putting them in shackles. No one would ever look at the whole picture. They only wanted to look at a little bit of the picture. All the media ever focused on was cash for kids. If that was something that the feds wanted to charge us with, then bring the charges and we'll go to trial.
So there is Judge Mark Ciavarella. Robert May, explain these conversations you had with him over a period of years. He says it wasn't Kids for Cash.
Right. We wanted to follow the active story here, literally, and follow him and the other judge through the prosecution, what was all going to happen. And our interview process is long. It takes a long time, and they're very conversational. And we covered all sorts of things, from the time the judge's earliest memories all the way through the prosecution, and so I think we developed a level of trust where he just started talking to us about all of it in great detail. And
Judge Michael Conahan, why did he decide to do this, and what about the relationship between these two judges? He was the so-called president judge?
That's right. Right. Well, Michael Conahan, when he was judge, he really had an immense power. He really did, and he was also a judge that never gave a comment to the media. He just never spoke to the media. So it was very unusual for us to get him, really. But he too felt that the story was portrayed as one-sided, and he wanted to take the opportunity to, share his side of the story.
This goes to the issue of zero-tolerance policy.
Right.
Talk about the reconsideration of that, where it's being reconsidered, where it isn't, even up to President Obama.
Right, that's a great question. Zero-tolerance policy came into favor in the 1990s. Even 20 years ago, Congress passed the Gun-Free Schools Act to keep guns out of school, but school districts went much farther. They were expelling kids for very, very little. After Columbine in 1999, it got even worse, not in terms of legitimately dealing with the gun issue, but illegitimately dealing with trivial offenses in school so administrators could get rid of kids that they didn't want in the classroom. There's been a gradual backlash over the last 5 to 10 years, and this story is part of that backlash. Parents, advocates, children's lawyers, the Dignity in Schools campaign, and many of our colleagues have worked to undo really quite silly zero-tolerance policies. And in early January, the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice and the Department of Education in Washington, the federal agencies, issued guidance to the 15,000 or so school districts in the United States, saying you really have to be careful because zero-tolerance policies are being applied incorrectly, without fairness, with implications for racial and ethnic disparities in our systems in ways that are really hurting kids. And for the first time, we have the federal government saying, slow down. What seemed reasonable 20 years ago in practice has turned out to be remarkably unreasonable and unfair to children and to families and to community.
Robert May, what were you most surprised by in making this film? And this has taken you years to make.
I was most surprised by the fortitude of the families and the kids, and how smart they really are, like the families and the kids. And you know, these are families, I think, that Judge Ciavarella judged as, you know, as not worthy or something. It's hard to say. I mean, you know, the stigma of this kid did something wrong, and so therefore this kid is flawed. And spending time with the kids and families has been amazing for me because these are really smart people. They've been these kids have been deprived in education, not all, but most. Hillary is the exception. She has a great education. She narrowly escaped not having that, however. And so I think that in society we think that if a kid gets into trouble, especially if they're labeled a juvenile delinquent, we think they're just a bad kid. I don't want my kids to be associated with them. I mean, I have 2 teenagers, so I used to think that way. I used to think, well, that kid's a troublemaker, gets into trouble. I don't want my kids near that kid because I judge that kid as just a bad kid. And the parents, too. They're all bad. The other thing that I learned is it wasn't just the kids that went through the trauma. It's the parents as well. It's the families. The families have gone through tremendous trauma. So, and often, you know, the kid gets punished for, you know, things, in some cases, that the parents are doing as well. So it's a combination of things. But I think all of the families that we followed in this film, even including the ones that didn't make it into the film, so we followed other stories as well, will be certainly forever in my heart. I care about them all.
That was Robert May, the director and producer of the new documentary Kids for Cash, and Bob Schwartz, executive director of the Juvenile Law Center in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Judge Mark Ciavarella is currently serving a 28-year sentence, and President Judge Michael Conahan is serving 17 years for taking $2.6 million from 2 private prisons. Ciavarella is serving his sentence in Illinois, Conahan in Florida. Both judges spoke to filmmaker Robert May before they went to jail. In October, the private juvenile detention companies at the heart of the Kids for Cash scandal in Pennsylvania settled a civil lawsuit for $2.5 million. The film Kids for Cash is set to open in Philadelphia on Wednesday night at the Kimmel Center for the Performing Arts in Philadelphia. It then opens in theaters nationwide. We'll post details on our website. You can also visit our website for our past coverage of the Kids for Cash scandal. That's democracynow.org.